Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Easy Talk, the podcast where we help you practice natural English conversations while exploring fascinating topics from around the world.
I'm Mike, and this is Jane. Thanks for tuning in. Today we're discussing an absolutely remarkable woman.
We're talking about Farah Pahlavi, the former Empress of Iran, the last queen of one of the world's oldest monarchies.
Her life story has everything: glamour, tragedy, revolution, exile, and incredible resilience. She went from architecture student to empress, and from palace to exile.
Whether you're interested in Iranian history, royal families, women's leadership, or simply love an incredible human story, this episode is for you.
We'll explore her early life, her marriage to the Shah, her role as empress, the 1979 revolution, her life in exile, and her legacy today.
Plus, at the end, we'll review 10 essential vocabulary words to help you discuss Farah Pahlavi accurately in English.
Before we start, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. It helps us create more global content.
And turn on notifications so you never miss our weekly episodes.
All right, Jane, I'm ready. Let's explore the extraordinary life of Farah Pahlavi.
So, Mike, before we dive deep, what do you already know about Farah Pahlavi?
Well, I know she was the Empress of Iran, the Shahbanu, and she was married to Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, the last Shah of Iran.
That's right. But here's something fascinating. She wasn't born into royalty. She came from a relatively ordinary background and became queen.
Really? So she was a commoner who married into the royal family?
Exactly. Her story is almost like a fairy tale. A young architecture student who captured the heart of a king and became the most powerful woman in one of the world's most strategic countries.
And she was the first empress in Iranian history to be officially crowned, right?
Yes, that's a crucial point. Farah was the first empress consort of Iran to be crowned in her own right. Previous queens were never crowned. Only the Shahs received crowns.
Wow. So she broke centuries of tradition. That's significant.
It was a powerful statement about her role and about the changing status of women in Iran at that time.
And of course, her life changed dramatically after the 1979 revolution. She's been living in exile for over 40 years now.
More than 4 decades in exile, Mike. Imagine leaving your country as queen and never being able to return.
It's heartbreaking when you think about it. She lost everything: her home, her position, her country, and eventually her husband and one of her children.
Yet she's maintained incredible dignity throughout. That's why her story resonates with so many people.
Today, we'll teach our listeners all the vocabulary they need to discuss Farah Pahlavi's remarkable life in English.
We'll cover her early years, her marriage, her work as empress, the revolution, exile, and her current life.
Plus, at the end, we'll review 10 essential terms that will help you talk about royalty, Iranian history, and Farah Pahlavi with confidence.
Let's get started on this incredible journey. Mike, let's begin at the beginning. Where and when was Farah Pahlavi born?
Farah Diba, that was her maiden name, was born on October 14, 1938, in Tehran, Iran.
She came from a relatively well-educated but not particularly wealthy or aristocratic family, right?
Correct. Her father, Farah Diba, was a captain in the Imperial Iranian Armed Forces. He came from a respected family from Iranian Azerbaijan.
Sadly, her father died when she was just 9 years old. That must have been devastating.
Absolutely. After her father's death, her family faced financial difficulties. Her mother, Farah Diba, raised Farah and her brother alone.
So Farah grew up understanding hardship and resilience from an early age. That shaped her character.
Definitely. Despite the financial challenges, her mother prioritized education. Farah attended prestigious schools in Tehran.
She studied at the Italian school in Tehran and later at the Lycée Français, where she became fluent in French.
This multilingual education would serve her well later as empress when she represented Iran on the global stage.
After finishing school in Tehran, Farah went to Paris to study architecture. Can you imagine? A young Iranian woman studying architecture in Paris in the 1950s?
It was quite progressive for the time. She enrolled at the École Spéciale d'Architecture in Paris.
And it was in Paris that fate intervened. How did she meet the Shah?
The story's quite romantic, actually. In 1959, Farah was a student in Paris, and she was introduced to Iranian students studying abroad.
The Shah was visiting Paris as part of a diplomatic trip, and he was invited to meet with Iranian students at the Iranian embassy.
Farah was among the students selected to meet him. The Shah later said he was immediately struck by her beauty, her intelligence, and her dignified presence.
But they didn't get engaged immediately, right? There was a courtship period?
Yes, after that initial meeting, the Shah invited Farah and her mother to Tehran. They spent time together, and the Shah found himself increasingly drawn to her.
What was the Shah's situation at that time? Had he been married before?
Yes, this is important context. The Shah had been married twice before. His first marriage was to Princess Fawzia of Egypt, which ended in divorce. His second marriage was to Soraya Esfandiari Bakhtiari, which also ended in divorce, largely because Soraya couldn't have children.
The need for a male heir was crucial for the continuation of the Pahlavi dynasty.
Exactly. The Shah needed a son to succeed him, so when he met Farah, he was looking for a wife who could potentially give him an heir, but also someone who could connect with the Iranian people.
Farah was young, modern, educated, and came from a non-aristocratic background. She represented a new direction.
In November 1960, the Shah proposed to Farah. She accepted, and they were married on December 21, 1969.
Wait, November 1960 proposal, but December 1969 wedding? Those dates don't match.
Good catch. I misspoke. Let me correct that. They met in Paris in 1959. The Shah proposed later that year, and they were married on December 21, 1959. I apologize for the confusion.
No problem. So, Farah Diba became Queen Farah of Iran at just 21 years old. Imagine going from architecture student to queen in a matter of months.
It's extraordinary, and almost immediately she had to navigate the complex world of Iranian royalty, international diplomacy, and public expectations.
Let's talk about that transition. How did Farah adapt to royal life?
Initially, it must have been overwhelming. The Iranian court was filled with protocol, tradition, and powerful figures who had been close to the Shah for years.
But Farah brought something new, a modern perspective, an education, and a genuine interest in Iranian culture and arts.
She also quickly fulfilled the most important expectation placed upon her. She gave birth to an heir.
Yes, in October 1960, less than a year after the wedding, she gave birth to Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi.
This was momentous. The Shah finally had a male heir, securing the dynasty's future, or so everyone thought at the time.
She would later have 3 more children, Princess Farhanaz in 1963, Prince Ali Reza in 1966, and Princess Layla in 1970.
But being the mother wasn't her only role. Farah was determined to use her position to make a difference.
Mike, let's talk about Farah's role as empress. What powers and responsibilities did she have?
In Iran's constitutional monarchy, the queen, or Shahbanu, didn't have formal political power. But Farah transformed the role into something much more significant.
How so?
She used her position to champion cultural and social causes. She became a patron of the arts, education, and healthcare.
She was instrumental in founding numerous cultural institutions, wasn't she?
Absolutely.
Farah was the driving force behind the Shiraz Arts Festival, which brought together traditional Iranian arts and avant-garde performances from around the world.
That festival was revolutionary. It featured Iranian classical music, Western opera, experimental theater, all in one place.
Some conservative figures criticized it as too Western or too liberal, but Farah believed in cultural exchange and artistic freedom.
She also helped establish museums, including the Tehran Museum of Contemporary Art. Do you know what's remarkable about that museum?
Yes, under her patronage, the museum acquired one of the most valuable collections of Western modern art outside Europe and America.
Works by Picasso, Warhol, Pollock, Bacon, all purchased with oil revenues when Iran was wealthy. The collection is worth billions today.
And ironically, after the revolution, many of those works were hidden in the museum's basement because they were considered decadent by the new regime.
They've slowly been displayed again in recent years. It's fascinating how art survives politics.
Beyond arts and culture, Farah was deeply involved in social welfare. She founded the Farah Pahlavi Foundation, which supported healthcare, education, and women's programs.
She particularly focused on women's education and professional development, right?
Yes, during her time as Empress, literacy rates among Iranian women increased dramatically. More girls attended school, more women entered universities and professions.
Some historians call this period a golden age for Iranian women's rights.
It's complicated. Iran was still a traditional society in many ways, but compared to what came after, and compared to many neighboring countries, Iranian women had significant freedoms.
Let's talk about her official coronation. When did that happen?
The coronation took place on October 26, 1967, nearly 8 years after she became queen.
Why did it take so long?
The Shah wanted to wait until he had a male heir. Once Crown Prince Reza was old enough, the Shah decided to crown Farah as well.
This was unprecedented. No previous Iranian queen had ever been crowned.
Exactly. The Shah placed a crown on Farah's head himself, a symbolic act that elevated her status from queen consort to a co-ruler in the public imagination.
What crown did she wear?
It was spectacular, designed by Van Cleef and Arpels, the famous French jewelers. It contained emeralds, rubies, diamonds, and pearls, including a stunning 150-carat emerald in the center.
The crown was part of the Iranian crown jewels, one of the most valuable collections of jewels in the world.
The coronation was broadcast on television and watched by millions. For many Iranians, it was a moment of national pride, their empress being honored on the world stage.
But looking back, some historians see the coronation as a symbol of the Pahlavi regime's detachment from ordinary people.
That's a fair critique. While Farah was genuinely loved by many Iranians, the lavish ceremony highlighted the gap between the royal court and the poor.
It's complicated because Farah herself worked on poverty reduction and healthcare access. She wasn't disconnected from social issues.
But perception matters in politics. The opposition, particularly religious figures like Ayatollah Khomeini, used images of Western-style luxury to criticize the monarchy.
Let's talk about her international role. Farah represented Iran on numerous state visits abroad.
She accompanied the Shah to meetings with world leaders, presidents, prime ministers, kings, and queens. She was elegant, intelligent, and spoke multiple languages fluently.
She particularly charmed Western media. The New York Times, Time magazine, Paris Match, they all covered her extensively. She was photographed by the world's most famous fashion photographers.
But she was never just a fashion icon. When she met with foreign leaders, she discussed serious issues: cultural exchange, economic development, women's empowerment. She also hosted foreign dignitaries in Iran with extraordinary hospitality. The famous celebrations at Persepolis in 1971, for example.
Oh, the Persepolis celebrations. That's a whole topic in itself. Can we discuss that?
Definitely. The 2,500-year celebration of the Persian Empire was one of the most lavish events of the 20th century.
So, Mike, tell our listeners about the Persepolis celebrations. What were they?
In October 1971, the Shah hosted an extravagant event at Persepolis, the ancient capital of the Persian Empire, to celebrate 2,500 years of continuous Iranian monarchy.
It was meant to showcase Iran's ancient history and its modern achievements under the Pahlavi dynasty.
World leaders attended, kings, queens, presidents, and princes from around the globe. A tent city was constructed in the desert with luxury accommodations for guests.
The tents were designed by French interior designers and furnished with the finest materials. Each tent was like a five-star hotel suite.
The banquet was legendary. The caterer was Maxim's of Paris, one of the world's most famous restaurants. They flew in food, chefs, and staff.
The menu included quail eggs with caviar, mousse of crayfish, roast lamb with truffles, and champagne from the best French vineyards.
And the wine, despite Iran being a Muslim country, was served freely. This later became a point of criticism from religious opponents.
Farah played a central role in organizing the event. She oversaw many of the cultural and artistic elements.
She also greeted the female dignitaries, queens, princesses, first ladies, and hosted them throughout the celebration.
How did the Iranian public react to the Persepolis celebrations?
That's complicated. Some Iranians felt immense pride. Their country was hosting world leaders and showcasing thousands of years of history.
But others saw it as excessive. While millions of Iranians lived in poverty, the royal court spent hundreds of millions of dollars on a party.
Estimates vary, but some sources suggest the celebrations cost over $100 million, an enormous sum at the time.
And this was just 7 years before the revolution that would overthrow the monarchy.
In retrospect, Persepolis can be seen as either the peak of Pahlavi glory or the beginning of the end, a symbol of the regime's disconnect from ordinary people.
Farah later expressed mixed feelings about the event. In her memoirs, she acknowledged that while it celebrated Iran's heritage, it may have been too extravagant.
But at the time, she believed she was serving her country by showcasing its culture and history to the world.
This is where understanding context matters. In the 1970s, Iran was wealthy from oil revenues. The Shah and Farah genuinely believed they were modernizing and elevating their country.
They didn't foresee how quickly it would all collapse.
Mike, let's move to one of the most dramatic periods in modern Iranian history, the 1979 revolution. How did it affect Farah and her family?
The revolution didn't happen overnight. Throughout 1978, protests against the Shah's regime grew larger and more intense.
Farah later wrote about those days in her memoir, An Enduring Love. She described the anxiety, the uncertainty, the fear.
The Shah was ill with cancer, a fact hidden from the public. He was indecisive, torn between cracking down on protests and making concessions.
Farah encouraged him to stay strong, but also worried about the violence and the growing opposition.
By January 1979, the situation was untenable. The Shah and Farah made the difficult decision to leave Iran temporarily.
They left Tehran on January 16, 1979. Farah later described that moment, boarding the plane, looking back at her country, not knowing she would never return.
It must have been surreal. One day she was empress, the next she was a refugee.
They flew to Egypt, where President Anwar Sadat welcomed them, but they couldn't stay permanently.
From Egypt, they went to Morocco, then to the Bahamas, then to Mexico. They were constantly moving, never settled.
Meanwhile, back in Iran, Ayatollah Khomeini returned from exile and the Islamic Republic was declared in April 1979.
The new regime was hostile to the Pahlavi family. They faced prosecution in absentia, and their property was confiscated.
Farah's beloved cultural institutions, museums, and foundations were taken over or dismantled.
In 1980, the Shah's health deteriorated rapidly. He needed medical treatment unavailable in Mexico, so they sought permission to enter the United States.
This became a major diplomatic crisis. The U.S. eventually allowed the Shah to enter for medical treatment, which led Iran's revolutionary government to seize the U.S. embassy in Tehran, the famous hostage crisis.
The Shah was treated in New York and later in Panama, but his cancer was too advanced.
He died on July 27, 1980, in Cairo, Egypt. Farah was at his bedside.
After the Shah's death, Farah remained in Egypt with her children, hosted by President Sadat. But Sadat's assassination in 1981 made Egypt unsafe for them.
She moved again, this time to the United States. She eventually settled in Connecticut, where she lives today.
Can you imagine that transition from Empress of Iran living in palaces to a quiet life in suburban America?
It's almost unimaginable, yet she rebuilt her life with remarkable dignity. Mike, let's talk about Farah's life after the revolution. How did she cope with exile?
Initially, it was devastating. She lost not just her country and position, but also her sense of identity and purpose.
She's spoken in interviews about the grief of exile, the longing for Iran, the pain of seeing her country change so dramatically.
But she also had children to raise. Crown Prince Reza was 19 when they left Iran. Farah Naz was 16, Ali Reza was 13, and Layla was just 9.
She had to be strong for them, even while grieving her own losses.
In the 1980s and 1990s, Farah kept a relatively low profile. She focused on her family and slowly built a new life.
But tragedy continued to follow her. Her daughter, Princess Layla, struggled with depression and eating disorders. In 2001, Layla died in London at age 31.
It was officially ruled a suicide from an overdose of sleeping pills. Farah was devastated.
Then, in 2011, her younger son, Prince Ali Reza, also died by suicide. He was 44.
2 children lost to suicide within a decade. The pain is unimaginable.
Farah has spoken about these losses with remarkable honesty. She's acknowledged her grief while also finding ways to continue living.
Her eldest son, Crown Prince Reza, is now the head of the Pahlavi family. He's been active in opposition to the Islamic Republic.
Farah supports him but has largely stayed out of active politics. She focuses on cultural and charitable work. In 2003, she published her memoir, An Enduring Love. It became an international bestseller. The book offers insights into her life, her marriage, and her perspective on Iranian history. It's a valuable historical document.
She's also been involved with various charitable foundations, particularly those supporting Iranian culture and children's welfare.
In recent years, she's become more visible, giving interviews and attending cultural events. There's a documentary about her life called The Empress and I that explores her story.
And she remains a beloved figure among many Iranians in the diaspora, a symbol of a lost era, a lost Iran.
But she's also controversial. Some Iranians criticize her for the excesses of the Pahlavi era, or blame her for not doing more to prevent the revolution. That's the complexity of historical figures. No one is universally loved or hated. Jane, let's discuss Farah's legacy. How should we remember her?
That depends on who you ask. For some Iranians, particularly those left after the revolution, she represents the last positive memory of their homeland.
They remember her elegance, her cultural work, her charitable efforts.
For others, especially those who supported the revolution, she symbolizes the excesses of the monarchy.
Let's address some specific criticisms. What do her detractors say?
Critics point to the lavish lifestyle of the royal court. While millions of Iranians were poor, the Pahlavi family lived in extraordinary luxury.
The Persepolis celebrations are often cited as an example of this disconnect.
Others criticize the Shah's authoritarian rule, the secret police, the suppression of political dissent. Farah was part of that system, even if she wasn't directly involved in repression.
She's addressed this in interviews, saying she was focused on cultural and social work and wasn't involved in security matters.
But some argue that by lending her image and popularity to the regime, she legitimized it.
There are also questions about the family's wealth. Did they take money out of Iran before the revolution?
This is complicated. The Pahlavi family had personal wealth, but much of it was tied up in Iran. After the revolution, the new regime confiscated everything.
Farah has said they left with almost nothing. She's supported herself through book royalties, speaking engagements, and the help of friends.
Her supporters point to her genuine cultural contributions, the museums she founded, the artists she supported, the educational initiatives she championed. The Tehran Museum of Contemporary Art remains one of her most enduring legacies.
And her work for women's education had real impact. Literacy rates among Iranian women increased dramatically during her time as empress.
So, how do we balance these different perspectives?
I think we have to hold complexity. Farah Pahlavi was a real person, neither a saint nor a villain. She was a woman of her time and position who tried to do good within a flawed system.
That's a mature way to approach historical figures. People are complicated.
Exactly. And her personal tragedies, exile, loss of country, deaths of 2 children remind us that she's human with human suffering. Let's talk about how she's perceived in Iran today. Can Iranians inside the country discuss her?
It's complicated. The Islamic Republic doesn't allow public discussion of the Pahlavi family that isn't negative. But privately, many Iranians have complex feelings.
Some young Iranians born after the revolution are curious about the pre-revolutionary era. They see photos of Farah and wonder about that time.
There's nostalgia among some for the relative freedoms and economic prosperity of the 1970s.
Others, particularly those whose families suffered under the Shah, have no nostalgia at all.
Social media has allowed some discussion, but it's risky. Iran's government monitors online activity.
In the diaspora, Farah remains a unifying figure for many Iranians. Her birthday is sometimes celebrated by Iranian communities abroad.
But even in the diaspora, opinions are divided. Some Iranians left because they oppose the monarchy and support the revolution, or at least oppose the Pahlavis.
So she remains a controversial figure, even among Iranians outside Iran. Mike, let's get more personal. What kind of person is Farah Pahlavi?
From everything I've read and watched, she comes across as dignified, intelligent, and resilient.
Those who know her describe her as warm, curious, and genuinely interested in people.
She's also described as having a quiet strength. After all she's endured, exile, widowhood, losing 2 children, she continues to engage with life.
In interviews, she's thoughtful and measured. She doesn't shy away from difficult questions, but answers with diplomacy and grace.
She's also maintained her love of culture. She attends art exhibitions, concerts, and literary events whenever possible.
And she's remained close to her surviving children and grandchildren. Family is clearly central to her life.
Her faith is also important. She's a devout Muslim, though her interpretation of Islam is more liberal than the version practiced in Iran today.
She's spoken about praying daily and finding comfort in her faith during difficult times.
What about her relationship with the Shah? Was it a love match or a political arrangement?
From her memoir and interviews, it seems it was genuinely loving. She describes him as a devoted husband and father, not just a monarch.
Of course, she would say that. She's his widow. But others who knew them confirm they seemed close.
The Shah was reportedly different with her, more relaxed, more human. She brought warmth to his life.
And she was devastated by his death. Losing her husband while in exile in a foreign country must have been incredibly painful.
She's spoken about visiting his grave in Cairo at the Al-Rafai Mosque, where he's buried alongside Egypt's last king.
She can't visit Iran, but she can visit her husband's grave. That must bring some comfort.
How does she spend her time now?
She lives quietly in Connecticut.
She sees friends, attends cultural events, and occasionally gives interviews or speeches.
She's also active on social media. She has an Instagram account where she shares photos from her past and thoughts about Iranian culture.
For someone in her 80s, she's remarkably engaged with the modern world.
She's also written a second book, though it's not as well known as her memoir.
And she remains involved with the Pahlavi Foundation, which supports Iranian students and cultural preservation.
Jane, I want to discuss something important. Farah's relationship with feminism and women's rights.
That's a fascinating angle. Was she a feminist?
She probably wouldn't use that word herself, but her life and work certainly advanced women's causes.
During her time as empress, Iranian women gained significant rights. The Family Protection Law of 1967, for example, restricted polygamy and gave women more rights in divorce.
The Shah's regime promoted women's education and employment. By 1979, women were judges, doctors, engineers, and professors.
Farah symbolized this modern Iranian woman, educated, professional, visible in public life.
But critics say these reforms were top-down, imposed by the state rather than emerging from grassroots women's movements.
And after the revolution, many of these rights were rolled back. The hijab became mandatory, women were pushed out of certain professions.
Some argue that by tying women's rights so closely to the monarchy, Farah and the Shah made those rights vulnerable to political change.
That's an interesting critique. When the monarchy fell, so did monarchical feminism.
In Exile, Farah has continued to support women's causes. She's spoken out about the situation of women in Iran today.
She's particularly supported Iranian women activists and artists in the diaspora.
She's also been vocal about the woman, life, freedom protests that began in Iran in 2022.
Yes, she's expressed solidarity with the protesters and called for international support for Iranian women.
So, in a way, her feminist legacy continues, even if she doesn't use that label.
It's worth noting that some Iranian feminists criticize her for not being more radical, for not challenging the patriarchal structure of the monarchy itself.
Again, we're back to complexity. She was a product of her time and position.
But she undoubtedly opened doors for women in Iran. Thousands of women who became professionals in the 1960s and 1970s have her to thank, at least in part.
And today, she uses her voice to support women's rights in Iran. That matters. Jane, how has Farah Pahlavi been represented in popular culture?
She's appeared in numerous documentaries, books, and articles. Her image is iconic. Those photos of her in the crown, her elegant fashion, her glamorous appearances.
In the 1970s, she was frequently compared to other famous women, like Jackie Kennedy Onassis.
There are interesting parallels. Both were young, beautiful, stylish wives of powerful men who experienced tragedy and exile.
Jackie Kennedy famously visited Iran in the 1960s and was hosted by Farah. Photos of them together are fascinating.
In recent years, there's been renewed interest in Farah among younger generations, partly through social media.
Instagram accounts dedicated to the Pahlavi era have thousands of followers. Young Iranians discover photos of Farah and are captivated.
There's also a Netflix documentary series about royal families that features her story.
And numerous podcasts, like this one, have explored her life.
She's also been the subject of academic study. Historians and political scientists examine her role in Iranian modernization.
Fashion designers have drawn inspiration from her style. Her 1960s and 1970s outfits are still studied today.
The crown she wore at her coronation is often featured in books about royal jewels.
But popular culture also simplifies her. She's sometimes reduced to a glamorous image, her complexity and humanity lost.
That's why episodes like this are important, to present the full person, not just the icon.
Her memoir is the best source for understanding her perspective. It's worth reading if you're interested in her story.
I'd also recommend documentaries like The Queen and the Shah and Iran, The Last Revolution.
For Persian speakers, there are numerous interviews with her on YouTube where she speaks openly about her life. Mike, let's talk about how to discuss Farah Pahlavi respectfully and accurately in English.
First, use correct titles and terminology. She's properly called Farah Pahlavi, that's her name. Farah Diba was her maiden name.
When referring to her historical position, Empress Farah or Queen Farah are both acceptable, though Empress Shahbanu is more precise.
Some people call her the former Empress of Iran or the last Empress of Iran.
Avoid calling her simply the Shah's wife. That diminishes her individual identity and achievements.
Be aware of the political sensitivities. For supporters of the Islamic Republic, any positive discussion of the Pahlavis is offensive.
For monarchists, any criticism is offensive. You can't please everyone.
So, focus on accuracy and balance. Present facts, acknowledge different perspectives, and let listeners form their own opinions.
When discussing the revolution, avoid oversimplifying. It was complex, with many causes and many actors.
Don't blame Farah personally for the revolution's excesses or the monarchy's failures. She was one person within a larger system.
Similarly, don't romanticize her or the Pahlavi era. Acknowledge the problems alongside the achievements.
When discussing her life in exile, be sensitive. She's experienced profound loss: country, husband, children.
Avoid intrusive questions about personal tragedies. Focus on her public life and contributions.
Recognize her as a living person with feelings. She's in her 80s now and has endured much.
And if you're writing or speaking about her, verify your facts. There's much misinformation about the Pahlavi era online.
Use reliable sources: her memoir, academic histories, reputable documentaries.
And remember that for many Iranians, she's not just a historical figure, but a living connection to their homeland and heritage.
Approach the topic with curiosity and respect, and you'll do fine.
All right, everyone. Now it's time for our quick vocabulary review. I'm going to go through 10 essential words and phrases related to Farah Pahlavi that will help you discuss her life and legacy in English with confidence and accuracy.
Listen carefully, take notes if you can, and try to use these words in your own sentences.
Word number 1, Shahbanu. Shahbanu is the Persian title for Empress, or the female ruler of Iran. It literally means Lady of the Shah, or Queen. For example, Farah was the first Shahbanu in Iranian history to be officially crowned. This title is distinct from Maleke, which simply means queen. Shahbanu implies a higher status, closer to empress. In Iran's monarchy, the Shahbanu was not just the Shah's wife, but a figure with her own ceremonial and sometimes political role. Farah's coronation as Shahbanu in 1967 was unprecedented and signaled her elevated status. When discussing Farah, using Shahbanu shows respect for her historical position and cultural context. Remember that this title isn't used for other queens, it's specific to Iran's imperial tradition. Word number 2, exile. Exile means being forced to live away from one's native country, usually for political reasons. For example, Farah Pahlavi has lived in exile since the 1979 Iranian Revolution. Exile is different from simply moving abroad voluntarily. It involves loss of home, citizenship, belonging. For Farah, exile meant leaving Iran permanently, never being able to return. Her exile was sudden and traumatic. Many Iranians in the diaspora also live in exile, whether forced or chosen. The experience of exile shapes identity, memory, and politics. When discussing Farah's later life, exile is a crucial concept. It explains her grief, her longing for Iran, and her continued connection to Iranian culture despite physical separation. Word number 3, coronation. Coronation is the ceremony of crowning a monarch or consort. For example, Farah's coronation took place on October 26, 1967, nearly 8 years after she became queen. Coronations are elaborate rituals full of symbolism: crowns, scepters, thrones, religious blessings. They legitimize royal authority and mark the formal beginning of a reign. Farah's coronation was particularly significant because no previous Iranian queen had been crowned. The ceremony involved the Shah placing the crown on her head himself, a powerful symbol of their partnership. Coronations are public events, broadcast and celebrated. They're moments of national unity, or sometimes, as in Farah's case, moments that later become controversial. Word number 5, dynasty. A dynasty is a sequence of rulers from the same family, often lasting for generations. For example, the Pahlavi dynasty ruled Iran from 1925 until 1979. Dynasties are common in monarchies and empires. They create continuity and tradition. The Pahlavi dynasty was relatively short compared to Persia's ancient dynasties, but it transformed Iran dramatically. Farah married into the Pahlavi dynasty and became its last empress. Dynasties rise and fall. The Pahlavi dynasty fell with the 1979 revolution. When discussing Farah's position, understanding dynasty helps explain the importance of having heirs, the weight of tradition, and the significance of the family's fall from power. Word number 6, Islamic Revolution. The Islamic Revolution refers to the 1979 uprising in Iran that overthrew the monarchy and established an Islamic republic. For example, the Islamic Revolution forced Farah Pahlavi and her family into permanent exile. This revolution was one of the most significant events of the 20th century in the Middle East. It transformed Iran from a pro-Western monarchy to a Shia theocracy. The revolution had many causes: economic inequality, political repression, religious opposition, cultural conflicts. Farah's life was completely upended by it. Understanding the Islamic Revolution is essential for understanding her story. The revolution isn't just a historical event, it continues to shape Iran today. Word number 7, memoir. A memoir is a historical account or biography written from personal knowledge or special sources. For example, Farah Pahlavi's memoir, An Enduring Love, offers her personal perspective on Iranian history. Memoirs differ from autobiographies in that they focus on specific themes, periods, or experiences, rather than covering an entire life chronologically. Farah's memoir is valuable because it provides insight into her thoughts, feelings, and experiences that aren't available elsewhere. Memoirs are subjective. They represent one person's truth, not objective history. When reading Farah's memoir, we learn her version of events filtered through memory and emotion. Word number 8, diaspora. Diaspora refers to a population scattered outside their traditional homeland. For example, the Iranian diaspora, including many who left after the revolution, maintain strong cultural connections to Iran. Diaspora communities preserve language, traditions, and memories across generations. They often maintain political engagement with their homeland. Farah is part of the Iranian diaspora, though her position is unique. The Iranian diaspora is global. Millions of Iranians live in North America, Europe, Australia, and elsewhere. They've contributed enormously to their host countries while maintaining Iranian identity. Understanding diaspora helps explain Farah's community, her audience, and her continued relevance. And word number 10, resilience. Resilience is the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties, a toughness. For example, Farah Pahlavi has shown remarkable resilience, rebuilding her life after revolution, exile, and personal tragedies. Resilience isn't just about surviving, it's about adapting, growing, and maintaining hope despite adversity.
Farah's resilience is evident in her ability to continue engaging with life, supporting her family, and maintaining her dignity despite unimaginable losses. Resilience is a quality we admire in public figures because it reflects human strength. Farah's story, for all its tragedy, is ultimately one of resilience. She didn't just survive, she found ways to continue contributing, connecting, and living meaningfully.
Those were fantastic, Jane. 10 essential terms: Shahbanu, exile, coronation, patron, dynasty, Islamic Revolution, memoir, diaspora, and legacy.
Practice using these words in your own sentences. Try to describe Farah's story using as many of these terms as possible. It's excellent English practice.
And if you're discussing Iran or the Pahlavi era with others, these words will help you sound knowledgeable and precise. Wow, Jane, what an incredible journey through the life of Farah Pahlavi. From architecture student to empress, from Tehran to exile, from tragedy to resilience.
Her story truly has everything: romance, glamour, power, revolution, loss, and survival. It's the kind of life that seems almost fictional.
We learned about her early years, her marriage to the Shah, her cultural patronage, the coronation, the Persepolis celebrations, the revolution, and her life in exile.
We explored her complex legacy, her relationship with feminism, her representation in popular culture, and how to discuss her respectfully.
And we reviewed 10 essential vocabulary words that will help you talk about Farah Pahlavi and Iranian history with confidence.
Now it's your turn to engage. Here's our question of the day.
What aspect of Farah Pahlavi's life story interests you most? Is it her rise from commoner to empress, her cultural work, her experience of exile, or something else?
Or if you're Iranian, especially if your family lived through the revolution, we'd love to hear your perspective. How is Farah Pahlavi remembered in your family or community?
Share your thoughts in the comments below. We read every comment and love learning from our incredible international community.
If this episode taught you something new or touched you in some way, please give it a thumbs up. It helps more people discover our content.
Don't forget to subscribe to Easy Talk and turn on notifications. We explore countries, cultures, historical figures, and global topics from around the world.
Share this video with friends interested in Iranian history, royal families, women's history, or simply incredible human stories. Education breaks down barriers.
You can also follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Easy Talk Podcast for historical photos, vocabulary flashcards, and behind-the-scenes content.
Before we say goodbye, I want to leave you with this thought. Historical figures are never just one thing. They're complex, contradictory, fully human.
Farah Pahlavi was an empress and an exile. She experienced extraordinary privilege and unimaginable loss. She made contributions and mistakes. She was loved and criticized.
Learning about people like her reminds us that history isn't simple. It's full of nuance, ambiguity, and humanity.
When you encounter historical figures in your reading or conversations, approach them with curiosity, not judgment. Seek multiple perspectives. Remember, they were real people living real lives.
And when you discuss sensitive topics like revolution, monarchy, or exile, do so with respect for the people who lived through these experiences.
Thank you so much for joining us on this journey through the life of Farah Pahlavi.
Keep practicing your English, keep learning about the world, and keep approaching other cultures and histories with openness.
I'm Mike.
And I'm Jane, and this has been Easy Talk.
See you next time. Keep exploring, keep learning, keep growing.